Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Sam Koslowski. Emma, why don't we go back to revisit this story? It was 2 years ago. It was the biggest story in the world for a while there. It's now got a documentary on Netflix that has almost brought it back into the frame, and now we've got this report. Take me back to what the Titan sub was and what happened to it.
Yes, so the Titan was a deep-sea submersible operated by this private US company called OceanGate. Now, when I say submersible, it was a vessel about the size of a minivan, and for the price of $250,000 per person, tourists were offered the chance to travel down in the submersible to see the wreck of the Titanic, the iconic shipwreck, which lies about 3,500 metres underwater in the North Atlantic. Now, on the 18th of June 2023, 5 people were on board the Titan. That includes OceanGate's CEO and pilot of the vessel, Stockton Rush, a British billionaire named Hamish Harding, French Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, and Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood, who was there with his teenage son. The vessel lost contact about an hour and 45 minutes into its journey.
Right.
And what followed was, as you would remember, an international search and rescue effort that absolutely gripped the world.
And when they first went missing, there was this hope that the crew could still be alive, right?
Absolutely. So we knew that the crew had 4 days worth of oxygen, emergency oxygen. Right. So in the event that they got trapped on the ocean floor, that there would be 4 days, hypothetically, for them to survive down there. But on the 22nd of June, debris from the sub was found near the Titanic site, roughly 600 k's off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. Now, officials confirmed pretty much straight away that the vessel had imploded on its descent, killing everyone on board instantly.
And the reason we're talking about it today is that the US Coast Guard has released this very lengthy report into the incident, trying to break down exactly where things went wrong. Before we get into the report itself, just explain to me the role of the US Coast Guard in all of this.
Yeah, so the Coast Guard, or the USCG, is responsible for a whole raft of maritime measures, including leading rescue missions. It does that in US waters or in international areas under US responsibility. It has maritime security responsibilities, and it also acts as a regulatory and certification authority. So it has some safety responsibilities. Like in the case of the Titan sub, the Coast Guard leads investigations also into marine casualties.
Right.
So where there is loss of life or potential violations of maritime law, it will lead investigations. Now, in line with that, the Coast Guard led the Titan sub investigation because OceanGate was a US-based company and several of its passengers were US citizens, despite the fact that it imploded somewhere in international waters off Canada.
So they've spent 2 years looking at this incident. What's the top line finding here?
So the biggest finding here is that the deaths of the 5 people on board were entirely preventable, and that OceanGate failed at its leadership level and at every level across the board.
What do you mean by that?
So the report found that the vessel's design was never certified by independent engineers. And if you've seen the Netflix doco, that goes into this a little bit. Essentially, the vessel was constructed and needed the certification of a third-party group to say, yep, this is fit to explore the ocean floor to this certain depth. And with that certification, it would have been able to sell tickets and operate as a fully legit tourist provider. Safety warnings from engineers and staff were repeatedly ignored, the report found, and it also said that key safety processes were missing or deliberately avoided. One of the biggest red flags that we've learned about in this report and over the course of the last 2 years from various whistleblowers is the use of carbon fibre for the Titan's main pressure hull.
As in the hull itself was made of carbon fibre?
Yes, so the part of the sub that keeps the passengers alive under extreme pressure at depths of 3,000, 4,000 metres below the sea level, that material had never been used in a deep sea sub like this before. So in the early days of the Titan sub, the carbon fibre element was seen as really innovative, as this big breakthrough, because carbon fibre is incredibly light. It's a lot cheaper and easier to use. So there were a lot of reasons to kind of be excited about carbon fibre being in the hull.
So is that actually, in terms of the mechanics of it, is that what failed? to lead to the implosion.
Yeah. Now, to understand this, we have to do a little bit of quick science talk about carbon fiber, but think of carbon fiber like millions of little strands of string all connected. So all of those little strands can break or weaken. An analysis of the sub showed that this process had begun called delamination. The layers of the carbon fiber had started to separate, so there was evidence of stress damage to the hull. And every time one of those strings broke or came apart, it weakened the entire structure. Engineers and staff had reportedly raised concerns about the design on several occasions over the course of many years, but according to the report from the Coast Guard, OceanGate created a, quote, culture of fear and retaliation that silenced employees. One employee was even fired after raising safety concerns, and multiple employees left the company during the development of the sub and prior to that fatal journey in June 2023.
Hello, my name's Sam. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and I started the Daily Aus way back in 2017 because I didn't think there was enough content just like this video available for young Australians online. And the truth is that there's still not enough, and we have a lot of work to do. And the best way that you can help us is by pressing subscribe to this YouTube channel. It is the best way to show us that you back us and that you back our future. Now, let's get back to the video. And I think what really strikes me about this report is that it doesn't seem to be one factor just in isolation. It's the conflation of factors. It's the idea that you can have a material that wasn't seaworthy, but then the concerns raised not being heard because of company culture.
Exactly.
Either one of those by itself perhaps wouldn't have led to this outcome. Tell me about the role of the CEO, Stockton Rush, in all of this, because he was on board when the sub imploded, right?
Yeah, so he died with the 4 other passengers, but the findings against him in this report are incredibly scathing. So the overarching theme, or all of the findings, kind of trace back to this common finding that he had this intense influence over everything and almost a narcissistic arrogance about achieving the goal of taking the sub to the Titanic regardless of any safety risks. So he was the CEO, the lead designer, the pilot, and the report says he pursued innovation and speed, as in speed to achieve the expedition, over safety and skipped established testing procedures. In fact, the report says, and I think this is really critical and what a lot of people have been waiting for, that if he had survived, he would have likely faced criminal charges for his role in the disaster and for contributing to the deaths of the passengers.
The report was really detailed about the way in which he influenced company culture and his leadership style. Give me a quick sense of the specifics there about that culture piece.
Yeah, so there's a strong link between Rush and these findings of a toxic work environment. The report states that for several years preceding the incident, OceanGate cut corners, quote, leveraged intimidation tactics and what the report called the company's favourable reputation to evade regulatory scrutiny. So this reputation of being a really innovative company, doing something exciting and different, and that they took advantage of that. The findings stated that by strategically creating and exploiting regulatory confusion and oversight challenges, OceanGate was ultimately able to operate Titan completely outside of the established deep sea protocols, which had historically contributed to a strong safety record for commercial submersibles.
And what about the other passengers in all of this? I mean, were they aware of all of these risks and perhaps regulatory missing pieces before they jumped into that vessel?
Yeah, that's a question that has come up a lot over the last couple of years. And the report found ultimately that the passengers were misled by the company. The report says OceanGate called the passengers mission specialists, and this was a sort of loophole to get around the fact that they were not certified to run the expedition with paying tourists, but by bringing these people on as mission specialists, they could argue that each person on board had a particular role, so served a purpose in that way. And the contracts that they were made to sign really downplayed the risks. In some cases, they overstated how tested and safe the vessel really was. And to quote the report, quote, there was a systematic pattern of misrepresentation in how OceanGate described the Titan's capabilities and testing history to clients and to the public.
So this large report has come out. Have we heard from OceanGate in response to the report? And are they still actually operating as a company.
Yeah, it's worth noting the company essentially ceased operations after the disaster, just weeks after. So It hasn't responded directly to the report at the time of recording. The website's been taken down and OceanGate hasn't made any public statements for over a year. So I don't think anyone is really expecting to hear from anyone affiliated with OceanGate. A lot of the people that worked for them have tried really hard to distance themselves from that period of their careers.
Have we heard much from the families of the passengers who died?
Yeah, some of the families have spoken out this week, in particular the Dawood family. So that's the father and son who died on board. They released a statement saying no report could ease their loss, but they're hopeful that it will lead to accountability and prevent future tragedies.
I was really interested by that note that you raised around the fact that it was likely that the CEO would face criminal charges had he not been part of the group that died.
Yeah.
Are there going to be any legal consequences for this? Obviously not surrounding him, but surrounding other personnel in the company or the company itself.
It is possible. So while we know OceanGate no longer exists as a company, the Coast Guard has referred the case to US federal prosecutors, and that could then open the door to civil lawsuits or even criminal charges for anyone else involved. But in terms of criminal proceedings, Stockton Rush, the CEO, really is at the center of all of the negligence that can be traced back to human decision making.
Super interesting.
But on a broader level, we could see civil suits from the families, and the report calls for really significant change to how submersibles like this are regulated, and particularly how private companies operate them, because right now it's a pretty unregulated space.
And one quote that really stood out to me in those recommendations and that sense of discussing, this isn't the last time that we're going to see people try and push the barriers of exploration, be it in space or under the ocean or on land. That line around innovation must never come at the cost of safety.
Yeah.
Tell me about the recommendations. To kind of wrap this all up, how does the US Coast Guard think that we should all move forward in this space?
So there are 17 recommendations. A lot focus on safety and certification. So the fact that third-party certification never happened for the Titan, ultimately the Coast Guard wants to ensure that never happens again. So there's a series of regulations there. There are recommendations for stronger whistleblower protections, because we know that several employees really tried to raise the alarm on this before the tragedy happened. And there's recommendations around clearer oversight of deep sea exploration. So frameworks around international waters, tourism in that space, and who should be responsible for kind of global safety and safety frameworks. And it's recommended to ban or strictly limit the use of unproven materials like carbon fiber for primary hull pressure vessels until they can be independently validated in deep ocean conditions.
It really gives me the sense that they're trying to strike a balance between preserving that space for deep sea exploration and the natural human desire to figure out what's out there and what's deeper than we've ever gone before, but also make sure that things are happening safely.
Yeah, and you don't want to over-regulate this space to limit scientific exploration, but I guess there's a divide between tourism versus valid scientific exploration and research. I think to wrap it up, it's all about kind of correcting failures and plugging regulatory gaps. But as the report said, OceanGate's strategy was to circumvent regulatory frameworks rather than engage with them in good faith. So hopefully this is a turning point for how deep sea tourism is regulated.
All right, so right now the Coast Guard will hand this to prosecutors and we'll wait to see if some of those more formal criminal charges or civil cases are laid. Thank you so much for taking us through that.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us on the Daily Aus this morning. We're going to be back in your headphones with those headlines in the afternoon. Until then, have a fantastic day and we'll speak to you later.